Welcome back, folks, to the Life with Nick podcast. I'm your host, Nick Kleitch. And as always, I appreciate you tuning in for our podcast of the month. Today's podcast is a little bit unique in nature. And I say that because the gentleman that I'll be podcasting with today is someone I didn't know maybe 2-3 months ago. And so life happens fast, but we're extremely excited to have him come on to the show. And we're going to be talking all things leadership transformation. So, Jarrod, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Appreciate you having me, and agree. It was. Seems like it was just a couple weeks ago that we met. Maybe it's been a month.
Time happens fast when you're out networking in the community, right?
That's right.
Beautiful. Well, the theme, as I just mentioned, was leadership transformation, and I'm sure we're going to get into both personal, maybe, and work, and when it comes to leadership, but hopefully by the end of the podcast kind of come back to and understand is the ability of turning a reactionary leader into an intentional and adaptive leader. And so anyone listening to this that may in the future run a team or currently run a team or just need a nice piece of information on personal leadership, this is going to be a wonderful podcast for you to tune into. But first, I'm just going to have you introduce yourself, Jarrod. Feel free to touch on as much as your background as you'd like, and also just kind of what you're doing professionally.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll try to keep it concise. I went to when I was in high school. One thing that I was drawn to immediately was helping other people learn. I initially started college out of high school to be a teacher. I just kind of I remember like I kind of look outside as if I'm visualizing myself sitting in a classroom. And I was always the obnoxious kid up front, right? That it was raising my hand if I didn't understand and asking the questions where everybody's probably like, just, be quiet, let's move on. I had to understand the concept. And once I did, once that light bulb moment happened for me, I was immediately just drawn to help other people. If I saw them struggling or knew that that light bulb wasn't going off for them, I was immediately drawn to go help them out. So just helping people learn and continue to learn myself is something that just has always identified me. And so, eventually my career led me into the military. I was a combat medic for several years in the military. And I kind of had dual hats. I had dual roles where I worked full time for the National Guard, and I was able to maintain that training and learning and development side of what I enjoyed by being a training manager. And I was immediately, as you are sometimes in the military, just because you've been there for X amount of years, or sometimes it feels like days or months, you're put into a leadership role. And so I be put in charge of a team and just kind of had to learn. I did that peer to leader jump really quickly and learned a lot of hard lessons that way. But was a medic in the National Guard. And then as my time, ended with the military and I decided to go into the corporate world, I've led teams in, instructional design and healthcare, those kind of areas, and leadership and learning and development have been two themes that have just kind of echoed throughout my career.
It's a wonderful sentiment. And isn't it strange how life sometimes just pulls us in a particular direction? Some people are musically inclined, which we'll get to in just a little bit. Some people are leadership inclined. Some people are, very good creative minds. And some people really like just analytics and whatnot. So I've always found that fascinating as I've gotten older and into my career that everyone's just wired a little differently.
Yeah, I completely agree. And sometimes you go, you're able to go with that. Sometimes you chase something that you think you were meant to do, and you do that for, an extended period of time, and you go, wait a minute, stop. This is not what I'm supposed to be doing. Let me get back to me,
Yeah. The other thing I'll add in here too, this is slightly impromptu per our script, but when I was going through the process of learning my strengths, and there is a book that is quite popular, the Clifton Strength Finder, going through that process. But one thing that I found fascinating with that as well is just because we like to do something does not mean we're good at it and naturally good at it. So that was a huge light bulb moment for me in my career where I was like, okay, you have a particular set of skills that doesn't matter if you feel good or not, or are in the mood or not, you're just going to be good at these things. So did you feel like you had that, or did you pick up on that maybe faster than me?
No, I love it. I love that you mentioned the strengths finder. I've done that myself, and I'm a firm believer in that. Lean into your strengths, maximize those. I feel like a lot of times we're looking at, well, I don't know how to do this, and I don't know how to do this, and we end up chasing so many things where it's like, that's okay. Like, I will probably never be a spreadsheet guru, and I'm okay with that. I've accepted that. You see other people that are good at that, and you're like, man, I need to develop that skill because Nick can really do these spreadsheets. And it's like, no, let Nick do his spreadsheets. Like, you go chase what you're passionate about and hopefully good at. To your point.
No doubt, yeah. And it's like, the more you can hone into that and trust it, the less headaches you're going to find throughout your working career. But I'm going to switch gears slightly, and this is going to be what might be an odd question to pose to you because we're talking about leadership transformation early. But from what we've learned, you are a wonderful musician and have done very, very successful on this in terms of your own kind of, I don't know if side gigs are right terminology to use. I'll let you explain all that, but give just a little bit of background there. And then the question that I wanted to pose to you is, what has music taught you about life? And I'm posing this in the sense of you as an individual versus being an actual maybe music producer or performing for other people.
Yeah, and I again, I'll try to keep this concise, but we could make the whole podcast about this one answer because music has taught me so much and it's given me so much. Success is measured in different terms. For me, what I initially set out to do with music, I've far surpassed. So to me, I feel like I'm a successful musician, but I haven't, sold any multi-million-dollar records by any stretch or anything like that. For those of you listening, don't go looking for me and be like, I never heard of this guy. But locally, we'll go back. Music initially, it kind of came to me through my father. He plays guitar. And I just remember, as young as 5, 6 years old, no matter what I was doing, my dad would just kind of he would go into his room and just decide on a whim to plug in his guitar and start playing. And whatever it was I was doing didn't matter anymore. Like, I was just immediately drawn and went in there and listened to him play. And at that age, when you see anybody do anything with an instrument that sounds halfway decent, you think they're an absolute pro. So I thought my dad was a famous rock star, And anyway, as I got a little older, became a teenager, I decided to pick up the guitar for myself. And it's one of those things that learning the guitar specifically taught me a lot about patience, because that's not something that you can do overnight. No matter what infomercial you look at that they're trying to sell you, you can't learn the guitar overnight. So that was a tough one, and it forced me to really stick with something. I can sometimes get that shiny object, syndrome, where it's like, all right, well, I did this for a little bit. I didn't really get anywhere with it in a month or two, so I'm going to go to the next thing. But with the guitar, I stuck to it and got really serious about it. And I also had this inclination that people that performed music live had to be famous people. And when I got old enough to go out to the adult establishments and started seeing people that I'm like, well, wait a minute, that guy just works down at the car dealership here in town. He's not famous, but he's performing at this, venue. And so that really put things in perspective and made me go like, I could probably do that.
And real quick to interject, Jarrod, at what age are you finding that specific revelation where it's not just a famous person that's performing?
Yeah, so I was, in my early 20s, because that's when I started going out to places that would allow you to go in, normally bars and that kind of scene, you had to be 21 to get in. And so when I was that age and going in and then seeing these people do this, that's when I started having the revelation, at that age of like, okay, the people that perform, because I had seen, in some other places as a kid, you go to concerts and you go to things like that, but being exposed to it at a smaller scale, I should say, really gave me that idea that, oh, this is possible. And this is something I could do if I really get serious about it. So I had learned a little bit of guitar at that point, but then put together the performance aspect of playing the guitar and singing, which up to that point I'd only done in the vehicle, so to no audience. But I pretty much had it in my head when I started doing all this, that I'm like, this is not going to be just a hobby for me in terms of I'm going to sit at home and do it. I want to do this out in front of an audience and perform. And so with that, once I got to the point that I could do that, one thing it taught me was just jumping in and doing it, not worrying about perfecting it. The very first time I ever performed in front of a crowd, I can remember it like it was yesterday. It was actually like 15 years ago now, but I remember being in this tiny bar and setting up my equipment and making sure everything was good to go, and then kind of nodding to the bartender to like, go ahead and kill the overhead music. I'm ready to start. And it literally was like the classic, like record skip. You could hear a pin drop and everybody turns and looks at me, you know, and I'm like, oh, I have to play now. And like, you know, like all of that, it's like a spotlight's on you, you know, and it's really just that moment. And so I got into it, and people always ask me, you know, before my shows, like, are you nervous? And do you still get nervous in front of a crowd? And I'm like, I don't. I was nervous for about the first 3 songs of that very first show. And after that, this confidence just overwhelmed me of, I've got this. I can do this. Yeah, it was a true revelation for me. And so then I went on and continued to learn more songs, hone my performance, hone the sets, kind of figure it all out. And it's been amazing. And something else it's given me and taught me about is just connection and how, yeah, the power of storytelling, right? Like how a song can be universal, and how it can touch people in different ways. And I'm always so grateful. I'll tell my audience, whether it's 5 or 200 people or however many people came out that evening, I always am so grateful, because I'm like, you could have gone anywhere else and done anything else tonight, but you chose to be here with me in this space. And the other thing is, it was a format for me to bring people together from all walks of my life, friends, family, acquaintances, coworkers. I had no other, I'm not a good cook, so I have like no other format to go like, hey, all you people that otherwise wouldn't have come together, they will get together to listen, to music. So that's what it's taught me. And yeah.
Let's get together. Yeah. What a beautiful sentiment. And I wanted to start there because one thing that is very fascinating to me about the difference in white collar, personal development, leadership, we can really kind of go down that path. And yet when folks have a creative side to them, I just love that mix so much. I think there is such balance that can be created there. And, some of these lessons that you're learning, there's no doubt that that's helped you in the professional work setting in various ways. I mean, if you can play for 25 to 50 people, you can probably go to a board meeting of 7 or 10 people and speak quite confidently. So, but the other pieces on connection and sharing moments, I think that's a very beautiful human thing as well, too. We need a lot more of that in today's world, with unfortunately all the stuff that continues to go on, which we're not going to get into here today. But thank you, Jarrod, for answering that and kind of just addressing that. That is a very fun skill set that you've been honing for many, many years. So now we're going to work a little bit into the main topic of the podcast. And I got to tell you, I'm very excited for this, because I think that when people hear the term leadership and they think leadership, they always, I feel, presume it's got to be from the top down. And they naturally are like, if I'm not a CEO, if I'm not a CFO, I'm not a COO, it's not for me. And I think that while we'll touch on some strategies that you could use if you are one of those people, some of this is just good for personal leadership. And I think that people really need to understand that they have that control within them to be a leader in their said community. So without me blabbling on here, I'll have you, the subject matter expert, kind of touch on things a little bit. So if you wouldn't mind, just to kind of kick us off in a nice way, why do you think leadership is this thing that has found you, and just maybe define leadership in your eyes? And then I'm sure we'll have a handful of other things that we can talk about along these lines.
Yeah, and I agree with you. A lot of people have their own conceptions and their own take on leadership, and I'm not to say that mine is the right one or the wrong one, but a lot of it does come from just my personal experience and who I am as a person. I remember in the military when I first joined, I went through basic training and advanced individual training, where you actually learn, whatever job it was you were assigned or that you chose. And when I was at advanced individual training, I just felt myself inclined to, to lead our platoon, because we got that opportunity. They're like, hey, you want to stand up in front of the platoon and give them the directions and guidance and that stuff, and then march around, like shout out the marching commands and guide I mean, you've got a formation of, for me, it was probably 50 or 60 people, and they're relying on me to listen. They're listening to my voice as I march people around. And I remember specifically a soldier coming up to me after the first time I led our platoon around, and he told me, he's like, I don't know what it is about you, but he's like, I would, if you told me to go march off that cliff, I'd go march off that cliff. He's like, you just inspire something about your voice or your authenticity or something, and so I wanted to dig deeper, into that kind of sentiment of what makes a good leader, and why are some more influential than others. And that kind of led me to really, like you talk about, the leadership doesn't have to come from top down. You don't have to be in a people leader position or a management position. A lot of times I hear it called. Leadership happens every day, and it happens from the person next to you. It happens from the individual contributor, through the organizational hierarchy, whatever that looks like at your organization, or in your, and as you mentioned, in your personal life. A lot of my stuff, I think one thing that stuck out to me throughout my military career is I didn't ask of my team or of my squad. I didn't ask anything of them that I wouldn't do myself or hadn't modeled, myself. And I think that's what, a post I made on social media today, which I'm growing my presence there. I'm getting a little better at posting consistently.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was right at the end of my military career. I was at my last training exercise. It's an annual training for 2 weeks. I had a soldier assigned to my squad, and it was his first. Like, he didn't even go to a normal, what we would call a drill weekend, like where you show up and you do Saturday, Sunday, and then you go home. He showed up. It was his first duty, was to show up to do this 2 week, exercise with us. And the contrast of that was just so interesting, because this was it. After the last day of this exercise, I was done. I didn't have to put the uniform on anymore. And I had been in for 13 years. And this kid was just out of training, and it was his first exercise at all. And so a lot of the voice in my head was like, this kid's not getting my A game, because I'm out. Like, I'm done. I'm not the guy that just got appointed and is trying to make a good impression. I'm the guy that's like, let's get through this so I can go on with my life, and close this chapter, which was a great chapter, but let me go on. But he, like, 4 years after I hadn't talked to him, I think we were connected on social media some way, but we hadn't connected in any meaningful way. 4 years after that training exercise, he was coming up. He had signed up for 4 years and then was moving on. He reached out and just said, hey, I wanted to thank you. Like, you set such a good example of what leadership should be. And I carried that throughout my military career. And I had no idea. It was completely by accident. Like, I didn't intentionally set him down and go, here's what you do and here's what you don't do. He just said, you set a great model for me to follow and to hold other leaders too. And so it was an incredible moment.
And that reiteration too, kind of going back to the first part of the podcast, is, you're in a situation where you may just have observed that there isn't maybe someone willing to step into a role to provide direction. And in my personal experience with leadership and personal leadership, 9 times out of 10, someone is just kind of waiting for someone else to just literally step into the spot. And what's ironic is when that happens, there seems to be, I don't know if it's like a natural sync that takes place, but some of the time people, when you have someone step in there and they give a little bit of guidance, they all feel like, okay, now's our time to kind of come together. So it is just that weird thing about people just simply being willing to step up to the plate and try, honestly.
Yeah, agreed. A lot of people get wrapped around this perfectionism of, well, I've got to know everything about leadership before I would ever consider stepping into it. And you're right. It's showing that ability and that willingness to just step into an uncomfortable spot and go, hey, I'm not, and that, we'll get into this later too, but that's part of it, of understanding within yourself, hey, I'm not perfect. And those of you looking to me for guidance and leadership, I want to hear from you. What am I doing well? What am I not? And just having that humility goes a long way.
And there's this also kind of connotation with leadership where there are bad leaders, there are decent leaders, and then there is this subset of people that you could say are born to do it, or they've worked so hard to get to how good they are. And I think that's one thing we need to address here too, because even if you started off your career, tried to get into some leadership, maybe it wasn't for you at the time and you felt you were a bad leader, versus someone that may think that they're super, super great and yet they're maybe not. I've always seemed that a trait is vulnerability and also this approach of, hey, I don't even know if I know everything. But what I do know is I care about people and I care about what we want and the result that we want to have. So why don't we just maybe all come together and decide on this? I'm kind of going on a tangent here, but any comments as far as like people that have either had a bad experience that maybe need to try it again, or just good kind of leadership 101 qualities or practices that you have found in your time?
Yeah, well, I can give you an example of terrible leadership and bad leadership, and that's, anybody who thinks that, hey, I've got the title, therefore you must, you have to respect me, and that kind of ego. There's really no room for ego in leadership. It's about servant leadership, and it's about how can I help the organization, how can I unify all of us, and that, I will say, what you touched on is the biggest piece of feedback that I've gotten when I've asked for feedback, to say, I try to keep it simple. What should I start doing, stop doing, continue doing, that kind of stuff. And my teams and my direct reports that I've led in the past have always just said, I appreciate your willingness to listen, to say, hey, what ideas do you all have on this, and how can we solve this? And that's not to say, as you know, everybody has various opinions. So not everybody's going to get, we're not going to try everybody's idea, but just allowing the space for them to feel heard is one of the best leadership characteristics, I think, that a person can try to mimic and try to hone in. I've gotten that feedback a lot, of the vulnerability and showing the human side, right? You don't have to go in and tell them the deep, dark secrets of your interpersonal life, but tell them about your day to day. And the biggest thing is the people that are around you. I've worked remotely for the last good portion of my career. And so it's not like, my fiance or my kids are coming to the office to bring me lunch and they meet in passing. So being intentional about sharing a personal story, uploading a picture, or whatever it may be, just showing that vulnerable personal side, I think, is another piece that really makes people open up and willing to follow you. But yeah, having the ego of just, hey, I'm in a authoritative position, so therefore you must listen to me and follow me. You're not gonna get very far that way.
Man, I already feel like we're off on a very good note, and we haven't even really, gotten into the concept yet, which is exactly where I wanted to be. This is another impromptu question that just came to my mind, Jarrod, as we're talking about this. For me, when I think about the balance between how you gain respect from people to lead, but then also not being someone that is ego driven, of like, hey, I'm gonna tell you what to do, but I'm gonna kind of maybe do it or maybe not. The old saying of, what is it, something along like the effects of do as I say, not as I do, something like that. I'm sure everyone listening to this has had a manager that has been that way. So in the opposite effect, as we know, what you had just detailed as some good qualities, how do you think commanding respectful leadership from your peers is something that, if I'm raising my hand saying, hey, Jarrod, I've been a leader for 6 months, I feel okay, but I still maybe don't have the authority or personal confidence maybe to step into that. How would you maybe direct or advise someone in that particular setting?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, especially coming from a coaching perspective, we've got to get a little more detailed on that. What is it that's making you feel that you don't have the confidence? Can you share with me a couple of examples where you walked away feeling like, yeah, that didn't land the way I wanted it to, or this didn't pan out the way that I wanted it to? Because what that confidence is such a big piece of it, and getting clear on your own authentic leadership style is really a big piece of it. You can't really go out and mimic and go, hey, all these other people that are out there that were great, like Steve Jobs and the Simon Sinek and these other great people that are out there doing amazing things and sharing amazing concepts. You can pick and you can go like, yeah, I like that. I like that. It resonates heavily with me. But you can't just go out there and completely mimic that style. You've got to find out what's true to you, what's authentic to you, because people are going to see right through that otherwise. So I would give them, again, I would ask a lot of questions to get very clear on why they lack the confidence. What specific examples are making them feel like they don't have the confidence. And another, one thing that leads into that a little bit is being willing and understanding not only how to receive feedback and asking actively for feedback, but how to give feedback, and how to tell people in a tactful and respectful and meaningful way what right looks like and what those expectations, what those standards are. That's what I see a lot of leaders struggle with. Is I don't have maybe I have expectations in my own mind, and I'm making assumptions about what my team understands and what they know. One great analogy that I love for this, Gary John Bishop, he's one of my favorite authors. He talks about this electrical fence, and he was relating it to personal relationships, but I think it relates with leadership as well. If you've got, if you've got dog, your dog Fido, let's say, and you've got this invisible fence out there and he's got a shock collar on, the way that Fido learns his boundaries and his expectations of where he can roam is he gets to that invisible fence and then he gets shocked. And he's like, okay, can't go that far, And we can't do that in leadership or our personal relationships. Obviously, we've got to communicate those expectations up very, very clearly, and help our teams and individuals understand what right looks like. Otherwise, you've got a team that's just going through day to day, reacting to what's coming at them. And then when they mess something up and they get reprimanded for it, it's that shock, right? It's, well, I didn't even know that was a standard. I didn't even know that was something we can't do. So that's where you've got to be, in clarity and confidence really go hand in hand. You've got to get clear on what are we trying to accomplish? How do I, what standard do I expect you to live up to? And I've got to communicate that as a leader, and it's got to be very clear, and it's got to be repeated. That's another thing where I see leadership fail. Well, I told them a year ago, or we just had a meeting last week, or we just whatever. And it's like, yeah, I bet a lot has happened between whenever that message was delivered and now. So it bears repeating.
And there was a recent employee survey that we did for my employer, and I don't know if my particular survey will be, carry any weight. But one thing I always put in there from a leadership standpoint is the sharing of the vision and the sharing of kind of why we're here. And I share that in this podcast because we've grown so much from its origin. And there are to the point now where you have hundreds of employees, and there's guarantee at least an eighth of them are just going in every day, punching clock and heading out. Not their fault, but they don't feel from top down like having to have the access to the vision and whatnot. There are themes that they share, and they do a pretty good job. I'm not saying that in a negative light, but to your point, the more that people can understand where you're going and why we do what we do, and then to your point, setting expectations, I think that is a wonderful sentiment. So anything you want to add on to that before we get into the kind of the origin story of your coaching business here?
No, I don't think so. I think that's a good segue to get right into that.
Perfect. So obviously you've mentioned that you found leadership positions. Leadership positions may have found you as well. But we've gotten to a point, and this is where actually we just organically met and started chopping it up and getting to know each other. And just so happened that coaching was maybe a topic of conversation that we were both interested in. And so I'm not going to steal too much of the mic time here. I'll give that over to you, but talk a little bit, Jarrod, on your transition from wanting to kind of start this business for yourself. And then we'll get into some other really cool things with that too.
Yeah. So I think a good starting point would be probably, I don't know, I don't have the exact date, but probably 3 years ago, we'll say. I got real clear on my own personal goals and the way that my life was shaping up. Right. I looked at myself when I was 18, and man, when I was 18, I think of the song "Like a Rock" by Bob Seger. And, it's just, you felt bulletproof. You felt like nothing could stop you. And that was me. And I looked at a few things. One, when I was 18, up to that point in my life, I had never even considered consuming a drop of alcohol. Like I never drank alcohol. To this day, I've never done any kind of illegal drug. But when I was a teenager, man, I walked the straight and narrow. I thank my mom a lot for that. She set some pretty clear and rigid expectations as I was growing up. But I also credit my older sister, and in kind of a unique and interesting way. And it was funny because she and I just had a conversation about this not long ago. But Unfortunately, my sister made some poor life changing decisions, and she was a few years older than me. So she really laid out kind of example and a roadmap of what I did not want to happen. And so, and I had other, I was always in athletics. I had strong coaches and other people that influenced me in my life. But I always just kind of one consistent trait throughout my life, especially as an adolescent, was I was accountable for my own actions. I didn't conform to any kind of peer pressure. I mean, trust me, when I was 16, 17 years old, I had everybody, hey, we're doing this house party over the weekend. You got to come over. And then hearing the stories on Monday in class of the crazy things that happen and all that stuff. And man, you got to come to the next one, Jarrod. And I'm like, it's just not me. Yeah, that's not who I am. Like, I'm trying to qualify for state track meet. I'm trying to, beat this team in basketball and whatever it may be. I'm focused. I was focused and I was intentional. I had a plan. And then, as life kind of changes us throughout the years and we have different experiences, like I said, now, 3 years from today, I looked at my life and was just like, this isn't shaping up the way that I want it to. I know I could be more intentional about the outcomes. I know I've got some ambitions and some goals. So I had, socially drank, never had any kind of drinking problem, but I had socially drank throughout my life, after I turned 21 and up to that point. So I was like, I'm like, alcohol's never really served me in any meaningful way. And it's, I've obviously plenty of times looked back and gone like, man, I had a little too many on Friday and now I'm feeling it on Saturday. And I think I thought of the wasted mornings and the wasted days. And I'll tell you, Nick, the older you get, those are, those are harder to come, to recover from. Wasted morning becomes like a wasted weekend, before you know it. And so I was like, I think I'm done with this. And so I initially had put it down for I said, I'm going to stop drinking for a year. And about 3 months into that, I went, yeah, I think I'm just done. Like, I don't see any reason. And it's funny because it was very easy for me to cut off. Tony Robbins, I read a book from Tony Robbins when I was in my early 20s. And it was Awaken the Giant Within, I think is the name of the book. And he talks about deciding versus stating preferences. And he said, when you decide, and he gets into like the meat and potatoes of what even the origin of the word decide is. And he said, basically, you cut off any other alternative. When you decide something, that's it. There's no other option. And that's something that's resonated with me throughout my life too. Once I decide on something now, not to say I don't ever state preferences, I prefer to be a fantastic lead guitar player. I'm not a fantastic lead guitar player today because I haven't decided to be one. Uh, but that's, there are other areas of my life where I went, I've decided this, and I don't care who you are, you're not talking me out of that. And so that was one thing I decided to do was stop consuming alcohol. And I love Bradley Cooper, the actor. He talks about this a lot, in a lot of YouTube videos and interviews. But he did the same thing in his early 20s, and he said, I never would have achieved my potential had I not stopped drinking alcohol. He's like, nothing bad ever happened. He's like, I never had any kind of major incident due to alcohol. I never had, but he's like, it was causing a ceiling for me. And he's like, and I didn't want that. So I left it alone. So I made that decision. Sorry, did you have something?
There was another piece, and I can you just repeat for folks, because I know we're going in a different direction of what I'm asking of you, but can you just share that one more time, the Tony Robbins concept? Because there is another gentleman, John Assaraf. He's a very notorious kind of personal development guy as well, and his iteration on maybe this similar concept is he asks people, "Are you interested in this, or are you committed to this?" And so many people are interested, few are committed. So it's a very good nugget of information.
Yeah.
That's why I'm asking you to repeat it, but just say that little piece one more time, and then we'll continue with the origin of the coaching business.
Yeah. So it was in his book, Awaken the Giant Within. And he talks about the difference between deciding something and basically stating a preference. So the analogy he gives, could be personal fitness or, losing weight or whatever, but it's like, if it's like, yeah, I'd like to lose 20 pounds or whatever versus I'm losing 20 pounds. And that's just that come hell or high water. Like, it doesn't matter what else happens around me. That gets into the resiliency piece a little bit of the F.O.R.G.E framework that we'll get into. But it doesn't matter. Once I've decided, it's happening, and there's nothing that's going to stop me.
Yeah, I think people in this world, or when I say this world, I should reframe this society. I think they need to hear that it's okay to do that. That's one thing I always try to stress with myself is like, sometimes in life you got to go out and get it. You got to go out and earn what's yours. No one is going to hand you this. And so another way to frame it too is like, will you do it, or do you want to do it,
Right.
in the similar light. So it's like, that's why I wanted to kind of highlight this, because it's just a quick soft reminder to people listening to this that, hey, you got to go out and get it, man. It's all there for you. You just got to be willing to do what it
I
takes.
love that. And I listen to a lot of Andy Frisella these days. He's got a great podcast, and I listen to his pretty regularly when I'm at the gym. And I love his take, because this is one thing that's always annoyed me, and he nailed it. When people say, when they look at people that are successful and they go, must be nice. The phrase must be nice when they look at people that are successful. And there's just that underlying just tone that like gets under my skin of like, yeah, like you're assuming that it was just handed to them. Like, must be nice to just, have all this, whatever, all the success. And I that just irked me to my core, because, and now I'll follow him on Instagram, and he'll post things, like selfies of him in the gym, and he'll put like, whatever consecutive day it is that he worked out. And he's like, just over here getting lucky, just, and I'm just like, exactly. Yes. Like, they don't see, and they don't even consider the work that goes into it. They just see the outcome and go, it must be nice.
That's beautiful. Yeah, and this ties into personal leadership and leadership as well too, because if you're going to be a leader, there are going to be times when you're going to need to set the tone for yourself, to enable yourself and your team. But before I allow us down this rabbit hole, let's get us back to the coaching business here, and then we'll cover some really good stuff in the back half of the podcast. So on to now that we've made that decision a couple of years ago, and I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, of course. So the alcohol piece was one small portion of it, but basically I methodically went after areas of my life that I knew I can improve, and that weren't looking the way that I wanted them to look. So, and that was an elimination thing of like, this is a hurdle or a thing that's like hindering me. So I'm removing it right now. And that to me, I was a big track athlete. So I imagine like looking down the 100-meter straightaway, I just took all the hurdles out of the way. So now I can just run instead of having to like jump over the hurdles. So alcohol was kind of that hurdle that was just getting in my way just enough to hinder me. So I removed that. And then I looked at like my personal relationships, specifically my intimate relationships, and looked at like, I haven't successfully sustained a long-term intimate relationship with a partner, in a meaningful way. And they've always fallen out, and I've kind of repeated this cycle or whatever. And so I went right at that. And I went and found a therapist and went through therapy. And it was so incredible, the transformation, and how passive it honestly felt and was. Like, after several, sessions and going through and just talking through everything, I can happily say today I'm engaged, and we have a wedding date for next August. And yeah, thank you. And it's like nothing has ever felt more right. In my other relationships, I always felt like something's missing or something's wrong or something's off. And, you just charge through and try to go like, yeah, maybe it'll work out, whatever. And it didn't. But, one thing, talking to my therapist, she just kind of made a comment one day. She said, you're in a lot better place today than you were a year ago. And it just kind of stopped me. And I was like, I really am. I'm like, yeah, you're right. And she's like, well, you seem surprised by that. I'm like, well, it kind of is shocking to look back and think about that. And she's like, yeah, like, like I didn't realize, wait, we've been working on this the whole time. It was just an incredible revelation. So then after that, it's like, okay, now I want to go after like finances. Like, I knew I'd never been, that disciplined with my money, that kind of stuff. So I took a lot of steps and put myself in some uncomfortable situations to make that what it needed to be. And just face, again, that discomfort, or that like, man, people are going to look at me and think like, what's this guy doing? But now, I'm in a better financial place than I've ever been. And not to say that I've got, millions falling out of my pockets, but just, I don't have, debt that's stressing me out, and, am I going to make this next payment, and that kind of stuff. And then I also went after my personal fitness. I had done a workout routine for several years, but never really paid any attention to my nutrition. So I hit that head on, and now I feel great. I am one of those weirdos that track my macros every day. But that was a tough habit to develop, but I'm there, and I can't remember the last day that I missed a day in the gym. And it's like, that's been for two good years now. And so just that's part of what led me to have the courage and the confidence that I'm like, let me look at my career and what things do I want to accomplish there. So then I started at my current employer back in March. And I mentioned earlier, the learning and development and training and development had always been a passion of mine. And then I kind of got more or less, I would say, pigeonholed in the healthcare industry because of my medic experience in the National Guard. I ended up getting my degree in healthcare administration. And so then it was a natural flow for me to go into healthcare. I was still in training and development, but I was in the healthcare space. And I just thought, man, if I could get into some kind of company where their main focus is learning and development, and maybe they're using cool technology to do it, because technology is another space that I'm just very, very interested in and passionate about. And so now I work for a custom online learning firm, and we do make instructor-led content as well, but I'd say the majority of our stuff is online training. And so it's super cool to be around other like-minded people. I'm on the executive team. I'm head of our people and culture, and it's a very rewarding career. And through that, and through my amazing fiance, she's like, based on the feedback and based on the things that you do and all that, she's like, you've got a real knack for coaching people. And she's like, you could probably spread this a little broader and help a bigger audience and help other people with leadership challenges that they're probably stuck, or maybe they're new. They don't know a thing about leadership. They've got some of those misconceptions that we talked about earlier on the podcast. And so that's what really led me to go like, okay, let me see what I can get away with. I want to start a coaching practice, and let me see who I can help and what I can do here.
Man, beautifully said. And the thing I love most, two things. First is your ability to self-analyze and develop awareness around where you were, and then identify what needed to change. And then with that, being able to go do the work. Because I think that there's a lot of people that may be aware or maybe not even aware, but the next step to take action to go do the work. Same thing with fitness and going to therapy. I'm sure there are days that are not going to feel good at all. And yet you still have to show up every day and improve yourself and do the work. And so I just personally applaud you for doing that. But I also really want the listeners to understand that if you haven't done a self audit like that, do that very much so. Give yourself a day to think. Give yourself a weekend away where you're literally going through every single thing. And it's not that you're going to fix all things in 30 days or 90 days or even a year, but having the path. That's what makes personal development so intoxicating, is because when you're starting to gain confidence in areas that you were at one point either weak in or scared of, frankly, watch out, because that's a very powerful human being. But the second thing I love about that, Jarrod, is that when some people start businesses, they have the intention of, let's say, just to make some profit, or, hey, I'm good at baking goods, or, performing musically. But this is a giving back business in terms of coaching, because you have yourself gone through the personal growth stages to say, I don't know everything, but based on my realities that I had to face, I think there's probably perspective and accountability nonetheless that I can share with you. So I don't know if you would have any other comments on that, or agree or disagree with anything, but I did want to take a little bit of time just to acknowledge the hard work that you've put in, and just know the approach that you're taking into this business comes from a place of, I've done this. I've been in the trench with you. So
yeah, no, thanks. I appreciate that, the kind words, and you're right. You talked about that momentum that you get, and I'll tell you, when I as methodical or as planned out as it sounds, it really didn't come to fruition that way. The first thing I looked at, was the relationship piece. After I removed the hurdle of alcohol, I'm like, okay, I'm going after this relationship piece. Like, it's me, I'm the common denominator here in all of this, like, stuff that hasn't panned out the way I want. I know it's me. I realize it's me. So like, I've got to fix that. And at that point, I didn't have the thought process at all to look at finances, to look at personal fitness, to look at any of that stuff. I didn't have that in my vision. And then once I got going and got some momentum, it was like, one thing, and honestly, the financial piece was kind of the last piece. That was really the bow tie for it all. Was like, okay, I've accomplished this, in my relationships. And I'm looking at relationships in a much more clear perspective. Maybe I should look at, my personal fitness too. Maybe because I'm not really getting what I want out of it right now. And so maybe I should go do that. Okay, great. And then I tackled that, and then as I just kept going, it's like, well, you look back at that and you're like, well, I did that. So why couldn't I go do this? So that's, yeah, you're right. That's a powerful human when you get somebody that's got that kind of momentum going. So, absolutely.
Yeah, and I want people to know that that's available to them if they are currently on a journey or want to begin a journey. I was just doing a little bit of reading before the podcast, and just some of the sentiments on there were about this very thing of just trying to get clear on what you want, and having the evidence of completing things successfully can really make you feel like you're in control of your path. So before I take us again down another rabbit hole, I would or I do want to bring up maybe 2 or 3 other points as it pertains to the coaching business. So we touched a little bit on origin, great origin story, and then focus. We touched on a little bit as well too. I want to give you just a little bit of another opportunity. If you wanted to address the focus of your firm, please go ahead and share. And then I did want to discuss a little bit of maybe your why behind it, and then kind of maybe some future plans, or take that for what it's worth.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I wanted to start this coaching practice because, again, I didn't want to go put together, a course or put together whatever, because again, going back to that music piece, right? Like the connection. I wanted to be able to help people and find them right where they were at, and talk to them, and put those strengths, again, that we talked about earlier, of active listening and that authenticity. I wanted to lean into those strengths, and I thought, that's going to be best. I'm best going to serve this audience by putting those skills into play. So for me, that was through coaching. And as far as a target audience, I love the learning and development space. So really, and speaking from that experience and saying, hey, I've been in these trenches, and speaking the language. Learning and development leaders are really, really my sweet spot, where it's like, hey, maybe you just took over an instructional design team, or maybe you took over a training and development team, and you're dealing, I've dealt with a lot of the problems and had to solve a lot of the problems that audience is probably saving. But honestly, a lot of this stuff, of course, is universal. So if there's somebody, that's in the technology space, or they're in healthcare, or whatever it may be, it'd be a bit of a different approach, and I wouldn't be able to speak the same language. But I think a lot of the concepts, as far as getting clear, getting focused, finding your true north, that accountability, that resiliency, that type of stuff, I think a lot of these concepts are very universal, and would be very valuable for any leader. Or another persona that I really, am drawn to is that person that goes, hey, I'm an individual contributor today, but I dream of leading a team. I dream of leading individuals. I want to be proactive, instead of reactionary or waiting for that opportunity to open up. I want to start proactively developing myself today, so that when that opportunity does present itself, I can go, hey, I put in a lot of work, and I'm ready to lead.
Yeah, and on that note, quickly before we get to our kind of final piece on the coaching business, that is just good advice in and of itself, right there. I had mentioned very, very early on the phrase of turning reactionary leaders into intentional, adaptive ones. And I'm sure people have heard of the 7 habits of highly effective people, but the more you can get ahead of the curve and begin to explore these things, the more benefit you're going to see. So I won't go on a tangent too much there, but I do want to kind of give a micro highlight to anyone that is in that position right now and has those aspirations to either reach out to Jarrod, or be proactive at the very least. So now that you've had the ability to tell the story a little bit and kind of your focus, what is kind of the end goal here? Do you want to kind of have this as just something that is on the side? Do you eventually want to step into it fully? Or what are your thoughts overall on just, and it's the beginning of the journey too. I should also mention that you've been in the business has only been open for what, maybe a month or two, or am I
Couple
mistaken on
months.
that?
Yeah.
Yep, there we go. Yeah. So we're early stage. So
Yeah.
if you
Yeah.
had to just guess, I'm not sure if you thought this through or not, but I always like to at least throw it out there a little bit.
Yeah, so it's a great question, a fair question, and a question I get a lot. So I'll go back to one of my other favorite authors, who is Jen Sincero, and she has a book called "You Are a Badass." And I've read the book, I've listened to the book multiple times. It's another one that's just worth repeating, like a lot of the Gary John Bishop stuff that I've listened to. But one concept that I grasped from her that I loved. When people, let's go back to like, okay, I set out on this, personal development journey and said, the first thing I want to tackle is relationships. And then the other things kind of came after. She talks about how, what kills a lot of momentum is, let's say I approach this way. Let's say that I said, hey, I want to start a coaching practice and I've got a goal of within a year, I want to be making $500,000 and I want to have helped X amount of people and I want to be able to walk away from my full-time job and, I want this house and all that. And there's probably value in doing that. But what she kind of gets at is, people will do that and maybe they have enough momentum to carry them through that first year. And at the end of the first year, maybe they haven't achieved everything they wanted to achieve. So they'll look at that and go, well, I failed. I tried the coaching business, wasn't for me, didn't pan out. She said, instead, you can reframe that and go, let me see what I can get away with. And that's really been my mentality approaching this is I know I can help people. I know I can add value. Let me start. And again, that goes back to that music journey that I was on where like the lights went off and everybody looked at me and it's like, you just got to jump in and do it. And so that's where I'm at right now. I'm building systems out. I'm building out frameworks. One thing I'm doing is a little bit of market research, right? Like what I assume my personal development and the journey I went through would be beneficial for people. But as I'm looking at the people I'm trying to serve, like what do they want and how do they want it? How do they prefer it? So that's, being early stage, that's just something I'm learning as an entrepreneur is like, you need to go out and find out, and have discussions with the people that are in this space and go, what challenges are you having? I'm not trying to solve anything for you yet. Just tell me what problems you're having. And when you do look for professional development or you look for solutions to these problems, where have you gone in the past and what have you liked about that? What has worked well and what hasn't? So that's very much where I'm at. Let me see what I can get away with. If this grows into some multi-million-dollar business and I'm able to step away from the full-time corporate world, then great. But if not, that's okay. I just want to help people.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that, again, this is something where I would like to just process that concept because that concept is a non-normal one in the entrepreneurship world or in personal development in some ways, because there is this push of, hey, you got to absolutely have all these things on your vision board and you have to absolutely be locked in on these metrics and whatnot. And there is power in that, there's no doubt. But I do like the way that she has this concept framed because it allows you to be more free and creative because you don't know. The world doesn't know. Nobody knows what's going to happen tomorrow. And so if you pigeonhole yourself in some ways, that could run you down and really kill any momentum that you do have or get because you haven't had hit these particular metrics. So I would encourage anybody to kind of lean into that a little bit as well too. Get started right away, and then just see what you can get away with. What a fun way to reframe that.
Yeah, I love that. When I heard that, I'm like, like one of those light bulb moments of like, yes, like let me see, like nothing's a failure. I'm learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we had talked about, and we'll comment on this here, and then we'll get into the concept that you've come up with, which is F.O.R.G.E, which is going to be a great back half of the podcast here. Is iteration and finding your footing just simply takes time and experimentation. You can have a plan, but the market may after a year say, you know what, Jarrod, these are the absolute particular types of people that you need to lean in on. But there's no way you would know that until you get into the trench. And so I admire the mindset. I hope to do that myself in any future endeavors as well too, is like, you just got to get out there and just be good at processing information, being adaptable, and iterating along with maintaining your vision of, if you still have passion to do it, that is a good reason to do something too. So as we bundle up the first quote unquote half of the podcast, is there any other thoughts or comments you'd like to touch on, Jarrod, before we get to Forge?
No, I think, one book as I know this isn't about, necessarily, this is about leadership and all that, but also from an entrepreneur space and understanding this need to, I love what you said. I forget exactly how you phrased it, but the market may come back and say something different. So that's something you've got to be aware of like, hey, I may think I've got the best product ever or the best service ever. and then I throw it out there. An analogy that I've heard is like a new company comes out with, I don't know, maybe a streaming platform, or they come out with something and they go out and they dump tons of money into advertising to get the brand out there and whatever. And it's a total flop because they didn't do any market research, and they find out like nobody buys it, So that's one thing I don't want to, if my solution isn't going to actually really help people, then I don't want to waste a lot of time and money and effort, trying to force it into a market that's like, no, that's not what we want. So there's a book that I'm reading right now. It's called Blue Ocean Strategy. And it talks about rather than trying to look at the competition. I mean, you do want to look at the competition and see what they're valuing and what people are paying for and that kind of stuff. But rather than just going like, okay, well, I can do it cheaper, or I can do it better, or whatever, it's creating your own market and going like, okay, here's what assumptions they're making. Here's where they value. How could I look at, and it really provides like a great framework and just actionable steps to going like doing your market analysis and market research, and then coming up with ideas of like, hey, here's how I could, it talks about how Apple did that with iTunes, and they looked at a market where it's like people are, I'm dating myself a little bit, but like back when LimeWire and Napster and all those first became a thing and people were pirating music, and Apple went like, yeah, we see that's going to continue to happen. So then they went out and developed iTunes and made it such a low entry, for a market, and they get quality music, and they get, they're not doing anything illegal, and it's such a low cost, and they can go buy individual songs instead of having to, buy a whole CD or whatever. It was really cool how they created kind of their own thing and created a market that before that didn't necessarily exist.
Yeah, that is a wonderful book. I read maybe half of it at one point, and then unfortunately my ADHD kicked in, and there was something other that
I struggle with that
that
too.
pulled
I
me,
started about 7 books, and I'm like, I should finish one of these.
because it was really, really good. And then I can't. I think the book I switched to was YouTube Secrets, excuse me, the YouTube Formula, which at the time that was a little bit more pressing. But I'm going to
Sure.
go back and read that one, because again, it's a different frame of not trying to be somebody else, but really trying to carve your own path. And it's a really solid read. Um, what wonderful. We've hit a great point, and we're gonna end with really some solid value add stuff. And before I speak for you here, Jarrod, I don't want to introduce Forge in a way that is either not giving it the due diligence or incorrectly doing it. So I'm gonna turn it over to you and have you just introduce the topic, and then we'll work through what kind of makes up Forge on an individual basis. So go ahead, my friend.
Yeah, absolutely. So, first of all, the name of the coaching practice is Forge and Flow Coaching, and there's meaning behind that. And when we reference back to that personal development journey that I was on, I looked at a few things, and one was I was very intentional about my actions. I wasn't reacting to something or following a trend or, doing something that somebody told me I should do. I sat down and got very intentional and clear on what I wanted and how I was going to accomplish it. And so I, with intention, built the life that I wanted. And that's what the Forge part is all about, of Forge and Flow. And then the flow part is really kind of two-part. The flow is, how do I stay consistent regardless of what external factors that are out of my control, how they hit me or come at me. You made a comment like, we don't know what tomorrow brings, and we don't know, for the entrepreneur example of what the market's going to do. But in life in general, we don't know what's going to happen, tomorrow. And so how do I build that resiliency, and how do I stick the course? If I've got, maybe I've got an injury that I've got to work through. How do I not allow that to get me, completely derail my physical fitness, because I got such momentum. So that's part of the flow. And then the other part is like, once I've got that momentum, and once I've got these things in place, is really the execution. How do I day in and day out continue to stay in my state of flow? And that's something I hear a lot from like athletes. You think about someone like Steph Curry, of how does he maintain that high level of performance? How does he stay in that flow? And I'm a big basketball player, so I think about games that I had where like I couldn't seem to miss if I tried. And then I had other games where like, nothing was going in. So like, how do you get into that state of flow more regularly and keep it? So that's the kind of the naming, the idea behind the name of the business. And then the Forge framework that I think you're alluding to, is really, so it's, I just feel like it's easier, it's a lower entry when I can help people and walk people through a framework, especially in coaching. Coaching a lot of times is just about this transformation. Here's where you are today, here's where you want to be at the end. So I wanted to come up with a way to articulate what it looks like to work with me. So if someone were to say, hey, Jarrod, if we were to start working together, where would we start? What would we do? And so I've created this framework around Forge. And really, if you took, the F.O.R.G.E, if you took that acronym, if you will, and kind of split it up, the F and the O, the focus and the ownership, is really about the Forge part, that I was just alluding to. And then the resilience and the growth is about the flow. And then the execution just really kind of brings them both together. I've intentionally created this system of my life, and intentionally created these habits. And I've built up a mindset that makes me resilient to external factors. And now the execution is like bringing it all together and achieving actual outcomes. That's one thing as a leader that I struggled with in the beginning, was like, how do I know if what I'm doing is even matters? And oftentimes it's looking back. Like I recently did an exercise where I reached out to people from, former colleagues, former direct reports. And I just said, hey, I don't know how I'm received, because I'm with me every day. So it's kind of like communication. That what I say, I assume here's how it's going to land, but I don't know how it lands. Only the person that hears that communication knows that. So I reached out to like 10, 15 people and just said, hey, would you mind taking the time to list 3 characteristics that come to mind that would describe me, and then 1 memorable story of our time together, whether it's friend, whether it's colleague, whether professional, personal, whatever it may be. And if you've never done anything like that, I highly encourage you to do it, because it was absolutely amazing and valuable, and just something that the point being, when it comes to execution and knowing if you're getting real results, there were former people that I had led that I thought, I don't know if they received me as a good leader or not. And plenty of them came back and said, like, you're the most influential leader I've ever had, and here's why. You're honest. And they multiple times I heard this: you just get things done. And I'm like, but the critic in me wants to go, really? What did I get done? Like, what could I? Because you feel like day in and day out, we're all at the end of the day. You look back at the day and go, did I do anything today? Boy, I felt like I'm exhausted, but what did I accomplish? And so that execution piece is really about, like, being able to, a big piece of that is the visibility of it, of like tracking and understanding. There's a great book called The 4 Disciplines of Execution. I think it's one of the Covey's, but it's an excellent book that talks about lead measures, lag measures. Again, we'll go back to, like, the fitness analogy. That's an easy one to go back to. But a lag measure would be the number on the scale if you're trying to lose weight. And the lead measures would be, how many calories am I taking in? How many calories am I burning? How many days am I going to, the gym per week? So, being able to execute on things and actually go, okay, I'm moving the needle in the right direction.
And this is exactly why I wanted to get this opportunity for us, Jarrod, to have you speak on this, because obviously you've put in a lot of thought into how this has come together. But I think it's very value add in your intention too. So it wasn't necessarily an intention of, hey, I just want you to come on a podcast and talk about what you got going. It was, okay, I've talked to a lot of people. You seem like you have a lot of clarity here. You've put a lot of work into this, and so just being able to get a long form piece of opportunity to discuss this, I think, is going to be, someone sitting there. This is, in some ways, free advice for them, but it's really good stuff. And I think that goes to show that you're willing to, it's not like, hey, you got to work with me, otherwise I'm not going to share some of these principles that I have, right? I think this all kind of helps reiterate
Right.
your character, reiterate your vision of truly, just trying this thing out and seeing what happens. But just for the sake of the podcast, we're going to probably be bob and weaving a little bit through each one of these, but I want to give you an opportunity to discuss each one in a little bit of detail, just so someone listening to this would be able to kind of get a grasp of this. So if you don't mind, I'd love to just dive right in on these and work through them without maybe going 30 minutes or so into each one at this time.
Yeah, I can give just a concise kind of description of each one if that's good. So with the first one, it's really kind of a 5 step framework. So focus, in an ideal world, and again, when it comes to coaching, you want to meet people where they're at. So maybe I'm working with a leader that says, you know what, I looked at what focus is and I've done that. I've gotten clear. I understand my values. I understand all that. I really don't feel like I'm going to benefit from that. It's not like I'm going to go, yeah, no, sorry, we got to do that anyway. Like that's okay. That's cool. I want to meet people where they're at. But if let's say that I was working with, for example, and it's not limited to this, but for example, that persona that we talked about earlier of, hey, I want to be intentional about my own growth and be ready when that next, that leadership opportunity presents itself. I want to be ready for it. And so I'm going to start with my own, my own professional development here. I would start out with focus. And that's, the focus is really getting crystal clear on your leadership vision and your priorities. What matters to you? How do you want to be received? And you look at this from kind of a holistic point of view. When I'm working as a leader, my colleagues, my peers, other managers, how do I want, do I want to be helpful for them? Do I want to be, do I want to help them develop, or am I more, do I want to learn from them, or both? How do I want to be received by upper level management? How do I want to be received, most importantly, from the people that report to me and are looking to me as a leader? Because I'll tell you one thing, I've learned more from the people that have looked to me for leadership. I've learned more from them than anywhere else. That's where you learn about yourself and you learn about your leadership style, not from an annual performance review, but from the people that you actually lead. That's where you learn a lot. So that's what focus is all about, and this.
Yeah, and being able to just be open minded to that feedback too. Sometimes people are not, but I knew that was maybe inferred, but I just wanted to put that out
No,
there.
yeah, 100%. You got to be open to the feedback and be willing to hear those things that may not be what you want to hear, but those are things you need to hear, and that's what's going to help you continue to grow. So, and through the focus, we'll do different, vision setting exercises and priority mapping, and how do I identify my North Star and what really matters to me, and how does it best move the dial for where I'm at, and just getting clear, getting crystal clear on that, and taking time to put the thought. You mentioned the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Love that book. And that's one that, I would probably refer to quite often in this step of like, hey, let's go through the 7 habits and let's write down your values. That's another big practice I'm a huge fan of, is like actually writing down your values, revisiting them. When you come to a point where you've got to make a decision on something and it's a tough call, like go back to your values and make sure you're still in line with those. So
Yeah, just to comment on that a little bit, for someone that may feel like they've done this or haven't ever done it, if you've never gotten super clear on what you want to do, this might be the most refreshing and beautiful exercise you'll ever go through. And it's not just one time in your life, it'll be multiple times because our life changes and evolves. But I was talking to one of my other co hosts on a different podcast, and we were talking about the evolution of motivation throughout the stages of your life. And I had kind of just that popped into my head here because I would strongly encourage anyone listening to this to really take some time to ask yourself the hard question. And it's focus, and it's in the first spot for a reason, not that they're in order of importance, but I think that if you haven't done that, I would really encourage you to take the time to get focused, because once that happens, it's like, man, the fog is settled and you can just go forward with a lot of confidence.
I love what you said there. The fog is settled. Yeah, that's such a great, just feeling, and not that everything is just going to happen. Again, you still got to put in the work. You got to put yourself in those uncomfortable situations. But getting clear on your values and what's important to you, it takes time, it takes effort, it takes thought, but it's so worth it.
Absolutely. Any other final comments on focus before we get to ownership?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think for a good high level, we could talk for the rest of the podcast about that one. That's true of all these. So
Yeah, beautiful. All right, ownership is the second of the Forge, not traits, but part of the framework.
yeah, so ownership again comes down to that just accountability piece, and that's again something that came very natural to me. I'm fortunate in that way. I know that doesn't happen for everyone else, but you know, leaders who really own their role and really lean into like, okay, this is on me. You know, you hear great leaders that will say things like, if the team failed, that's on me. You know, and you hear that a lot of times from like coaches in professional sports. You know, it's like, yeah, I didn't do a good job of preparing the team. Maybe UFC is your thing. You know, the coach of the fighter says like, yeah, I didn't prepare him enough for this or whatever if you failed. And so taking on that ownership and realizing like, it's me. This is on me. You know, if the team failed or if one of my you know, direct reports failed at something, it's always how can we get better, how can we avoid this in the future, and what can I do to make that better. So and this is, you know, habits kind of flow, habit building kind of flows throughout this entire framework. But I love Charles Duhigg, that does The Power of Habit, and then there's the other one, Atomic Habits. Both of those books are very powerful and really get into the psychology of habit building. And you know, we talk about the momentum and stuff like that. You think about something of regularly going to the gym. Once you've built a habit, you almost become on autopilot where it like feels weird if you miss a day. You know, whereas in the beginning, when you're trying to build those habits, it feels very weird and forced to do that. And so ownership gets into some of the psychology pieces too, of like, what are we, without identifying our values, what habits do we just have because they're easy and we're on, you know, it's scary to think how autopilot based we all kind of operate without even thinking about it. So ownership gives you that lens to look at and go, what am I doing intentionally day in and day out? You know, let me audit my habits and audit my behaviors and that kind of stuff. So that's really the ownership piece of it, is getting you to look at yourself and reflect at yourself.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful sentiment there. And the comment that I will make on this is a personal one because I had read a book, Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink, earlier on in my professional development career, still obviously on that path. But when he spoke about this concept of ownership, this really kind of set my hair on fire in a positive way because I was so hard on myself many of the times for lacking in being trying to be a perfectionist that I didn't realize that when you take accountability, because sometimes people are afraid to do that, it then allows you to celebrate your own accomplishment because you were the one that got your own bootstraps up and accomplished what you set out to do. So I just wanted to add that for people that maybe are nervous for ownership and accountability. There are some days it's obviously not the best, but the most empowering feeling of all is being able to know, hey, because I took ownership, I get 100% of the bread for the result internally because I have put myself out there, is one thing I wanted to add. And then another thing here recently was accountability sounds like a bad word, but we had a corporate trainer come in not too long ago to talk to us, and she framed it as, you know, what doesn't get talked about a lot is good accountability. And for some reason, there's something that stood out to me about that, and I was like, I've never heard those two things associated with each other. Is good accountability.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great spin on that, because I agree. Accountability kind of gets to be like, well, you got to own the mistakes and you know, that kind of stuff. But yeah, there's good accountability as well of taking that credit and going like, I mean, to your point, like I get to own that now because I took ownership of it. I did the hard thing or whatever it was. So now I get to take accountability of like that was good accountability. That's a good look on that one.
Yeah, and it's not that we need to take a megaphone and go shout that, you know, we're our praise and claim, but I think it just for high performers or those that have a drive at that level, it's that internal when you're at home on a Sunday afternoon or you know after work to say, hey, you know what, that self talk, I'm gonna give myself a little bit of credit for that because I took ownership. So,
Yeah.
any other comments on the first two pieces of the framework before we move to the second or the next phase?
No, I think, yeah, again, that's kind of the forge part of it, that intentionality piece of it. So yeah, next would be the resilience and the growth as part of that flow piece. And with resilience, that's just building that capacity to navigate challenges and bounce back stronger, right? Like, it's that, what is it? I think Mike Tyson has a famous quote of like, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. That's one of my favorite quotes. But that's the whole point of building up the resilience. And there's different ways to do that through stress management techniques or emotional regulation strategies, whatever that may be. But the resilience is such an important part of it. Of just having that mindset. Again, I think it also goes back to that determining or distinguishing between a preference and a decision of, I'm going to do this and nothing is going to knock me off track. I understand, but understanding and acknowledging things are going to happen that are out of my control, but that doesn't matter. I'm going to handle those in the way that I need to. And that's the other piece with resilience, is tackling those challenges head on. That's something, when you take over a team, you never assume you're going to have that one team member that is always complaining and never seems to be able to get things done and all that stuff. But it's like, you can't sugarcoat the conversations with that person. You can't just move past it. You can't overlook them. That type of toxicity or whatever spreads throughout the team. So the resilience there becomes, I've got to have this difficult conversation and hit this conversation head on, and then continue on, leading the team down the path that we're headed.
Yeah, and I think that with resilience, this is a skill and it is malleable. So the more you can practice it, the better off it's going to be. I'm not going to go on a whole tangent on this one, just because I think resilience by itself is a phenomenal thing to talk about. But yeah, it's a great sentiment for you to be able to incorporate that in at an individual level for a leader to possess that.
Yeah, it's a mindset of being open, because uncertainty is inevitable. Like, it's going to happen. That's just part of it, and understanding that. And I've encountered people, as all of us have, and I'm sure you have. When something bad happens, they just dwell on it. They get stuck on it. They get hung up on it. How could this have happened? I wasn't prepared for this, and that's it. It knocks them completely off course. So the resilience piece looks at that intentionally and just says, all right, we got to build this muscle, right?
Yeah, I just am going to be a hypocrite now, because there's one thing that came to mind, and I do want to share it now that we're slightly exiting on that. But my former boss is one of my main mentors of life, and one of the key lessons that he taught me is the most successful people have the ability to respond from adversity the fastest. They don't
Yeah.
take a week, they don't take a month to realize what's happened to them. They are so good about processing, but then immediately trying to fight for what's the next step to get out of this hole, what's the next step to kind of get the train back on the track, so to speak. There, so yeah, I'm a big fan of resilience. I'm also a big fan of growth as well too. So I'll pass it back over to you, Jarrod, to talk on that.
Yeah, one final piece on the resilience,
Oh,
because
sure, yeah.
you mentioned, bouncing back and getting back into it. There's a great book, and my current boss introduced me to it. It's called Managing Transition. Instead of managing change, which is, change management is a big piece, and there's value in that as well. But there's another perspective called managing transition, and it talks about, like, okay, the thing happened. Take the time to process it as you need, but then quickly identify what does the new, what does the new look like, and how do I get to that? Because if you just dwell, as we mentioned, if you just dwell in that space, that can kill your momentum. So I like the managing transitions, and I forget the author on that one. But yeah, moving on to growth. One thing that I have to do with my own personal growth is I have to limit it a little bit, because I want to do all the things, and I want to do them all well, and I want to do them all tomorrow very well. So I have to be very intentional in restricting my own personal growth, because I remember, there was a time, probably about this time last year, where I was like, I've never learned much about software development. I could code. I think I want to go learn coding a little bit. So I did that. And then it was similar to, like, your Blue Ocean Strategy book read, where I'm like, I did a little bit of it. And I was like, yeah, ADHD, next thing. But that's where, with personal growth, it's developing the skills, the adaptability needed to, to lead effectively in kind of any situation. So, and that takes time. It takes a path. It takes, and what I like on growth is back to what we said about the strength finder, where it's like, how can I continue to refine and get better at the things I'm already good at? And that's where I think a lot of people take a misaligned approach, where they go, I'm not good XYZ. So I'm going to focus all my efforts on filling these gaps. And then I'm going to neglect my strengths. I'm not going to continue to flex those muscles and learn that way. I'm just going to focus on all these things that I'm not good at. And what you end up getting is kind of a jack of all trades, right? You get that I'm okay at a lot of things. I'm not great at anything really. So that's kind of the approach I like to talk clients through with growth.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite things. Ever since getting introduced to this space, the concept of it similar to you, where I'm always curious, I'm always wanting more. The thing that I've really tried to internalize, and I just selfishly am going to speak a little bit to the listeners here, those that don't know me, for if they're listening, to you for this introduction of your business, is I have switched from kind of a short-term approach on growth to a very, very long-term approach. And that helped me because instead of trying to figure it all out, because as a young man, I did want that. Because you start reading this material, you go, what's my purpose? What's my strength? I want to, I want to get after it. But it does take, as the analogy goes, the chipping away at the marble, before it's like, we're going to take major chunks of what you're not. And it's going to take, there's going to be a phase where you're going to slowly refine and get even more refined to where you can't go fast with growth sometimes. And so anyone that has read a couple books that feels like they've conquered growth in 1 month or 1 year, I'm sorry to say that is not the reality of growth. Growth is a lifelong journey. But I think that speed change for me is what gave me a lot more freedom to go at it the way I wanted to, because if I wanted to go fast on the path, I could, but on the months that I wasn't going fast, it was still as process oriented, because I'm like, hey, I'm still making growth. It's just that the growth in this particular month, whether it's spiritually, emotionally, mentally, what have you, we're still not stagnant. We're still making strides. It's just we're not sprinting. We're just on a nice walk. So that's just my kind of piece on growth. If you have anything to add, feel free, and then we can get to the final piece here.
No, nothing to add on that one. And then, yeah, we can jump into execution, which, is that, I can't think of how many times I've read a book and then why did I read that book? That's a good, what did I take from that? Did I implement anything? So, a big piece of my coaching comes down to okay, we've done all the work. We've gained the insights. We've educated ourselves. We've grown. Now we got to go out and execute and make this happen and impact our teams, impact our organizations towards success.
One of my favorite words, man, growth, or not growth. I'm sorry. Growth was what we just talked about. Execution is one of my favorite words because, as they say, 10 hours of thinking gets beat out by 1 minute of action towards what you actually want to accomplish. So again, I won't allow myself to go into a soapbox there on execution, but, this is great, man. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast to be able to lay this out, because I think that when someone would go through this or getting just a dose of what you can bring to the table, I mean, this is probably only a small window into your ability to what you can do and what you want to do with people. But we just felt like this is a great place to start. So just to do a quick summarization on F.O.R.G.E here again. So we have focus, ownership, and then for our flow part, we have resilience, growth, and execution. And all of that together is a great framework that Jarrod may put you through if you're interested in doing some coaching with him. So just to kind of conclude, Jarrod, on a great note, first off, thanks for coming on the podcast. Wanted to give you a long form, ability to talk on these things. Thought you did a wonderful job laying out some of your personal challenges and also just encouraging people along their journeys while also giving your, a good window of time into what you want to create. And I think that's the beauty of life right there, is like, hey, let's just be able to share the message in a good way and get after it. So how can people find you, for those that are in my audience? Let's say that they're listening to this, they're going like, Jarrod, this is the kind of guy that I need to get in touch with and work with a little bit. So feel free to share any sentiments on the business or any places people can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. As we wrap up here, first of all, thanks for having me and allowing me this platform to share the message and share what I'm doing. And you're right, just getting started. Can't wait to have this conversation again next year and see where things are at. But for folks to find me, I do have a website. It's just forgeandflowcoach.com. So they can find me there. Obviously, I'm on LinkedIn. It's Jarrod Hogan, Jarrod. Last name is Hogan, Hogan, and then leadership coach. That's all in my title there. So find me on LinkedIn, reach out there. Otherwise, you go to my website, forgeandflowcoach.com. There's multiple ways to contact me through the website as well. So, yeah, man, looking forward to continuing to grow this and help people. And thanks again for having me today.
No doubt, man. It was an easy choice, and I'm super glad to introduce my folks to something like this because we've talked about a lot of various topics, but leadership and leadership transformation had not hit the radar. So you were wonderful to be able to detail that. If you're interested in all, please follow Jarrod. Reach out to him on his website. I did look at that beforehand, by the way, and it is a very favorable, easy access website. So you gotta keep it simple, and you did. But to all the fans of the show, we appreciate you tuning in. And until next time.